Okay, so good afternoon. A really warm welcome to you all to our fourth webinar in our living room series on understanding the lasting impact of COVID-19, hosted by Belong, the Cohesion Integration Network. So I'm Jo Broadwood, the Chief Exec of Belong. And for those of you who haven't tuned in before, Belong is a national network and membership charity. And our aim is to improve the practice of cohesion and integration by linking people to the latest research and evidence of what works, and by connecting people across local areas and nationally so that we can share and disseminate best practice and ultimately influence strategy and policy. We want to raise the profile of this vital work that I know many of the people tuning into this are doing, the people, organisations and communities across the UK who are tackling divisions and prejudice and strengthening and developing social connection, trust and belonging. So the COVID-19 crisis, as we know, is impacting social cohesion in all sorts of ways. There's been a real surge in social connection and kindness, with people coming together to support others. And at the same time, people in different localities and communities are being impacted very differently, and in particular according to race and ethnicity, age, precarity of income and inequality more widely. So Belong is therefore really pleased to be working with the Centre for the Study of Group Processes at the University of Kent on a big research study, Beyond Us and Them, funded by the Nuffield Foundation, to investigate the impact of COVID-19 and societal cohesion. We're also really grateful to our research partners across the country. There's 6 local authority areas we're working with, and also a range of community partners who are enabling us to collect data and do the research. And we're delighted to be able to share our first findings with you today. So I'm going to hand over now to Christine Cox, who's our network convener. She's going to be facilitating the session today, and she'll introduce our speaker and explain how we're going to run the session. So I'm going to turn my camera off so that you can concentrate on Chrissy and Fanny.
Thank you very much, Jo. Thank you. So now I'll welcome Fanny Lalot from the Centre of Group Processes at the University of Kent, who'll share her findings on the Beyond Us and Them research so far. So hi, Fanny. Would you like to share your presentation first, and then we'll come back to the Q&A? That's looking good. So if you just go into slideshow, we'll be ready to go.
It's working. Can you see that?
Excellent. Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right, let's go. Thank you very much, Chrissy. Thanks, Jo, for a very nice introduction. And thanks for all of you for joining us today. I'm really delighted to be there, to be able to share with you some of the findings from this very exciting project that we are conducting. Jo already told a bit about this. Again, so this is a joint research project by the University of Kent and Belong, the Cohesion and Integration Network, and we are being funded by the Nuffield Foundation for that. The aim of the present project is to explore how social cohesion within some groups and within parts of the UK, and also between groups and between different parts of the UK, is being affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And as such, this is a longitudinal project which will be running from May this year to October, with different things going on. As you can see here, we do have a lot of exciting things going on every month. We do have a monthly survey, so that's an online survey that goes out to diverse respondents. And we complement that with some focus groups and some interviews to get a deeper understanding on how different people might be responding to the pandemic. We have different respondents, as I said. We do collect data from 3 big regions in the UK, those being Scotland, Wales and Kent, with a focus on Kent obviously being the University of Kent being there, and other reasons. And we also have the 6 local authorities in different places in England, which I was going to show you in a minute, as well as a sample, incredible sample of volunteers all across the countries that we recruited through Belong networks and all our partners. So as for today's presentation, I will focus on this Wave 2 survey, so our June survey, and more specifically on the results from the 6 local authorities in England and the volunteers sample. That's the different places where we've been distributing the surveys. It's the 6 councils of Bradford, Blackburn with Darwen, Corderdale, Peterborough, Walsall and Waltham Forest. We distributed that survey to the network, and also all the different charities and organizations listed there that could distribute the survey to the network. Thanks to all of them, we were able to send this survey to a bit more than 2,000 respondents, and that wave was, so those data were collected between the 9th and the 24th of June this year. To remind you a little bit what that means, because so many things have been happening those past months, things have been changing so quickly. This is a short timeline just to, so we can remember exactly what was happening in that context. So 9th of June, that was just after primary schools were reopening in England, trying to reopen, and also right after we start this 14 days quarantine for all new travellers to the UK. During the data collection period, we had on the 15th the reopening of retail shops in England, and also, finally some good news, the alert level was lowered from level 4 to level 3. And then we ended the data collection on the 24th, which was before the lockdown was reintroduced locally in Leicester, also before we had this announcement of thousands and thousands of jobs being lost in just a matter of days, and also finally before the reopening of the pubs and restaurants and other public places. So that's it's clear for everyone exactly what people had in mind when they were answering the questionnaire. So now you know about who, about when, and about where, so we can get a bit more into the findings themselves. These slides here show you just a little bit more about who our respondents were. So I separate the demographics of, on the left-hand side, the local authority residents of the 6 local authorities, 6 places. And on the right, the community organizations respondents, so the volunteers in your sample. I'm not going to go into detail of that. You can probably just read a little bit. Just want to comment on a few things. So you can see, I imagine, that we do have a bit more female respondents than male respondents. Weirdly enough, it's something that we see a lot of time when we do online surveys. I don't have necessarily an explanation for that. But anyway, the important thing is that the number of male in the survey was sufficient so that we could properly account for any effect of genders in doing the analysis, so we can still properly check for that. We did have a good range of age with young people. I mean, we didn't have anybody younger than 18, but from 18 to very old age answering the survey. We do have a mixture of people living in cities, in towns, and in villages, which reflects different type of places where people can be in England, really. And finally, in terms of ethnicity and religion, majority of white respondents, of course, which again maps quite nicely the census data in the different places where we were collecting data. But we do have numbers of other ethnic minorities, most notably Indian, Pakistani, and Black respondents, which was really good in terms of reaching different people. A bit of the same thing for religion. And we did have, that's very interesting, and I will briefly come back to that at the end of that presentation. We did have a number of key workers as respondent in the survey, almost a third of them actually in both samples. And our key workers were mostly people working in schools and nurseries, or key government staff, or social care workers, or people working for the NHS. Finally, for the volunteer sample, we did have this very nice variation of people who've been volunteering for a very long time, more than 10 years, or for shorter period of time, down to 1 year and less. So that's also very interesting in terms of comparing people's experience. Right, now that you know all about this, I'm going to be able to talk a bit more about the findings. So we've asked a number of questions in those surveys. We are interested in a lot of different things, but for the sake of today's presentation, I will focus on 2 main constructs. The first will be the question of trust in the government, trust in other people. And the second would be the perception of unity or divisions within groups and between groups, as well as between people, different people. And I'll end up with just a few things about inter-individual differences and how some demographics can explain some difference. So let's start now with the question of trust. I'm going to start with trust in the government, which is something we are very interested in for various reasons, most notably in the context of the Covid-19. Most, if not all, of the very important decisions about what people can do or cannot do, what they should do, the lockdown, the things shutting down and so on, have all been taken by politicians. And with that in mind, it's very important to know what people think of those politicians and whether they trust them, because that's going to impact very largely how people respond to those rules and those restrictions and how much they, for example, they comply with it. So what about trust in the government? Well, our findings show that trust in politicians is actually quite mixed. So what you have here is the percentage of people who either agree or disagree or did not take position with respect to the following statements. Most politicians think they do not need to respect the law as much as normal citizens do. So you can see here that a large proportion of the sample, around 60%, actually agree with that statement. So there's this view that politicians form a sort of specific elite group and that they don't think they need to respect the law as much as other people do. So that's a quite negative views of politicians. However, when you look at this second question, here it's a bit reversed, and we have more people agreeing that they trust the local member of parliament to represent the interest of all communities across the constituency. So on that item, we see a bit higher level of trust, even if it's not massive, to be fair. It's still less than half the sample that agree with that. So from there, and a few other questions we had in the survey, it seems that trust in politicians is a bit mixed, it's not that great, and it might get higher when we go down to the local level. So politicians in general, politicians at the parliament level might be bad or not trustworthy or doing weird things, but when you go down to local members of parliament or politicians that people might feel closer to, that's when trust seems to be a little bit higher. And we did have one other question that investigates specifically the government response to the pandemic and the different measures that were taken. So that item read, I believe that the UK government is taking adequate measures to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. And as you can see here, we have exactly half the sample disagreeing with that statement. So people are mostly unhappy and not satisfied by the measures that the national government is taking at the moment. It's worrying when we check how that has changed from our May data, because that's another question we asked our respondents in May. And as you can see here, it's basically just swapped around. So we used to have in May half the sample thinking that the measures taken by the government were adequate, and we just swapped that around to half the sample think they are not adequate. Same number of people who are in between do not take position, and the number of people being convinced that the government is doing good seems to be declining. So, of course, all those things are very time specific, depends a lot of what's going on at the moment, what measures exactly the government's been taking. So it will be very, very interesting to see how that continue to change and evolve as the summer continue and we get into autumn. All right, that was about trust in the government. What now about trust in other people? Trust in other people, of course, is really important when you study social cohesion, because it's one of the requirements to be able to function together as a society, is to be able to trust others. So we ask respondents to what extent they trust different people coming from different groups to follow the government instructions about social distancing. There was something very specific, but that was still very relevant in June, about all the sorts of measure, mask wearing, social distancing, and so on, that we were all supposed to respect. When they ask about people in the UK in general, you can see that it's fairly mixed. Most people say they have a moderate level of trust in all people in general. And then there's roughly a third, a little bit less than a third, 29% in each direction, saying either that they do not trust or have very little trust in people in the UK in general, or saying that yes, they do trust people quite a lot. So that's quite mixed. It's interesting to compare that, however, with people in the neighborhoods. And you see here that trust is going up when you ask about people living in your neighborhood and not just people in the UK in general. And I think that mapped quite nicely with the finding I just presented about perception of politician, where same thing, where asked about the national or general level, trust was quite low, but when you ask about the local level, it seems to be coming a bit up. So we do see the same sort of trend here when asked about people and trust in people. There were two more groups that we asked about, which were young people and old people. And of course, we're very interested in that because in the COVID-19 story, it's been young and old people have been very, very prominently represented. First, because old people, of course, seems to be more at risk of the disease and of suffering harsh consequences in terms of the health if they get COVID-19. But now, as we start to emerge from the health side of it and start to go more into the economic aspect of it with all the consequences and job losses due to everything that was going on, young people are perceived as being more likely to suffer from those. So anyway, the generation thing seems to be very, very prominently marked by the COVID-19 crisis. It's striking here when you look at people's trust in old and young people to see the difference. There's a very, very high level of trust in old people to follow recommendation, but the level of trust in young people is absolutely low. It's terrible. So basically half the samples say that they do not trust at all, or they have very little trust in young people about whether they will respect the government's instructions about social distancing. Again, I just want to highlight that those numbers do not reflect any reality of whether all people respected or not the regulations, neither for young people. It's really people's perception of different groups on whether they will respect or not respect that. Well, it's striking that depending on age, trust that people have in other people seems to be very different. And from there, we can easily imagine that there will be some bigger discrepancies or divisions appearing between the two generations, for example, or between different groups, which brings me to the second question that we talk about today, which is whether people are becoming more united or more divided during the pandemic. And for this section, I'm going to talk about three things briefly. The first will be about personal relationships, so between peoples. Then we move to relations within groups and then between some groups. Just grab a bit of water. So first question that we asked here was really about personal relationships, and we asked people whether they think or they felt that their connection with other sorts of people had changed during lockdown. Clearly, from this first result here, you can see that relationship with friends and with work colleagues were negatively affected. So people were a majority to say that they feel much less connected or a bit less connected, but less connected anyway with their friends and work colleagues during lockdown, which of course makes perfect sense. That's something we would completely expect, knowing that a lot of people were working from home and that the workplace were closed, so you can't have the day-to-day contact with your colleagues. And of course, if you're respecting social distancing, you will see less of your friends that you would do in normal time. But anyhow, it's a significant loss of personal relationship that we can see here. A third category we asked about was with people from your local area. And here it's actually quite interesting because we really see a bit of everything. A lot of people say there's been no change with their relationships with people from the local area. And then we have almost equal number of people saying they were more connected or less connected. It might be that depending, of course, on where you live, whether you are shielding and not leaving your home, there might be, and you're avoiding the shops, you're avoiding the public places, of course going to have less contact with people from your local area. But on the other hand, since you're unable to go anywhere far from your hometown, basically, you might be more connected with those local people that you encounter more because you're not able to go anyplace else, really. And this seems to be even more the case with the last two categories we asked about, which were your family and your neighbors. There might be maybe one silver lining of this lockdown thing, is that quite a large number of people have said that they felt more connected to their family. And that's something, it's just not the number, it's also something people have been writing down in the survey to say that they were finally able to spend more time with their teenager children or with the partner or with other members of the family that they usually don't see that much. So yeah, we do see that in the survey. Almost half the sample saying they have stronger connection with the family now than before lockdown. And the same thing's happening with the neighbors. Again, I think it's similar to what I said for people from the local area. You're not able to go anywhere. The neighbors are the people closer to you, geographically speaking, so you might just have more occasions to encounter them. So in a nutshell, personal relationships have definitely been changing during lockdown, with more connection with some group, less connection with others. I'm going to turn now to relationship within groups and check whether people are feeling more united or less united. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, with a global pandemic, about being all in this together, having to fight this all together. But is it the case? Is that what people think? And if yes, who is this together? Is it really everyone together, or does it represent smaller groups of people? Well, it seems to be the case. So that question here asks whether for the first line, whether the UK as a whole was perceived as becoming more divided or more united, or whether there were no change and unity division. And we do have here half the sample, more or less, saying that the UK was becoming more divided according to them, according to their perception. Smaller numbers saying no change, and around a third of the sample saying the UK is becoming more united. It's quite different when you look at the local area again. So is the local area becoming more united, more divided? Here we do have a number of people perceiving their local areas becoming more united or with no change. So again, this comes back to some of the previous findings I highlighted, where at the national or the broader level things seems to be de-integrating a little bit, or with more divisions, but at the local level people seem to be finding more unity, more trust, more relationship. So in complement to relations within groups, we also ask about relation and division between groups, and whether those would be becoming larger or smaller. We ask about a number of different pairs of group. I'm just focusing on 3 today. We first ask about the UK versus Europe, because of course in Britain today this is highly relevant. We're still not done with the Brexit things yet. We're still kind of dealing with Europe on certain things, but not on others. So we wanted to see how our respondents were perceiving the relationship between the UK and Europe. And I guess, not surprisingly to many of you, most people are seeing the UK and Europe as becoming more and more divided, or with no change. It was a bit of the same thing, although less pronounced, when we compare London to the rest of the country. There seems to be also this perception of the capital city becoming more different, and more distant to the rest of the country. And we do see that here, with 42% of people saying they were perceiving the two as becoming more divided. Finally, we're back with our young versus old people, in relation to the previous finding that highlights with respect to trust and with relationships. And it's, of course, fortunately, it's a little bit less pronounced than what we have with the UK and Europe, but you still have 40% of people thinking that young and old people are actually becoming more divided as a result of everything that's going on than more united. So those results, just this slide here, it's very kind of negative, a bit worrying. And we really have, I guess, to find a way out of this, to find a way to reunite people again, to make them think like they can work together and they could complement each other again. All right, to finish, I just want to present, that's going to be very brief, but just a few results about how different people might be reacting differently to the pandemic. So I'm just exploring here the effect of a few demographic factors, so age, gender, and level of income. I'm not spending too much time on that because I think those results make a lot of sense. And also I want to highlight that those effects are not very, very big. So there are, for example, more differences within the group of men and within the group of women than between men and women. But anyway, we do have those effects. So I think it's important to highlight them because we might also want to adapt then policies and see how we talk differently to different people or act differently with different people. Basically, based on what you have on the slide here, you can see that things seems to be better if you are a man and you have a higher income, which I think will not surprise a lot of you. But anyway, both trust in the government and trust in other people seems to be higher amongst men than amongst women, amongst older people than younger people, and amongst people with a higher income. Those same three groups, so men, older, higher income, also perceived greater unity in general between groups or within groups. And the only findings that go the other way around with respect to age is the personal relationships. So personal relationships with family and friends are actually stronger or closer if you are younger, which I think would make a lot of sense if we consider that if you are older, you're more likely maybe to live on your own, not to live with your children anymore if they've reached an adult age already. If you're younger, you're more likely to be in a family unit with your partner or roommates or flatmates or so on, groups of friends, extra. So you will have closer relationship with families and friends. And again, people with a higher income also have report stronger personal relationships. And finally, what I mentioned when I was talking about key workers earlier, we were interested in comparing how people who volunteered in the context of the pandemic and also key workers would react compared to other people, because those two groups have basically been active in helping other people during those few months, but in very different ways, since key workers would do that in the context of their work and probably did not have a lot of choice, a lot of margin to decide whether or not to do that. Whether volunteers, on the other hand, were really deciding to put some time, some money aside and to try to help other people. So we were interested in comparing those and the experience of those with respect to the pandemic. Basically, in a nutshell, volunteers seems to have a very positive engagement with other people, a behavioral engagement and emotional engagement with other people, since they report higher trust in general, higher trust in the government, higher trust in other people, and also stronger connection with all the different groups, basically, so with their family, friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Key workers, on the other hand, report less trust in politicians, not in other people, but only in politicians, and also strikingly less connection with their family, which I guess we can explain to an extent with them having to go to work and not being at home with their family, enjoying some more time, more meals or whatever, with their partners and children. So on the one hand, we have the volunteers being more positively engaged with other people, and our key workers seems to be getting to this state of exhaustion and feeling less attached, more detached from other people than the rest of the sample. And I just want to highlight briefly that we've found those effects while controlling for the other demographic factor of age, gender, and income. So those differences cannot be explained just by age, gender, income. There's something else going on with the type of profession that people have, whether they were volunteering or not. Great, so how are we doing? Right, yeah. So from what I've just presented today, from those first findings, I think we can say that the pandemic has indeed affected trust and engagement differently for different people, and definitely had an impact on that. From different places, it seems clear also that the focus has switched from a global focus to a more local focus, with those increased relationships, increased trust and engagement at the local level, but at the same time, this growing perception of divisions and mistrust towards other group at the broader or the national levels. So we're going to continue working on that, obviously. So what's next for us? At the moment, going on as we speak, we do have the third wave of our survey. So our respondents from Kent, Scotland and Wales are being recontacted. They are filling the third questionnaire for us. We also have the focus groups going on, the one-to-one interviews that would help us go a bit further and deeper into those findings. We are very keen on getting, for example, key workers and volunteers to get more depth into those findings I just described. We'll have the next survey for those specific respondents, so the 6 local authorities and the volunteer sample, going on in August. And in between all that, we are also continuing the analysis of the data on 2 levels. First, we want to, because what I presented today was really just a snapshot of things, right, from these specific time periods in June. The more data we continue gathering, the more we'll be able to see change through time in those different perceptions. But we'll also be able to distinguish better between the different places, because all those places have the unique characteristics. It will be very, very interesting to see how people from those different places might react differently, have a different strengths and weaknesses with respect to the pandemic and reaction to that. And we've also just issued our first public finding reports, which basically contains the same findings that we're just describing today. Might be a few more things in there, so you can check that on the Belong website. And the next finding report will be due in September, so you'll be able also to know more about what's going on with that. That's all for me. Thank you very, very much indeed for your attention, and I'm very happy now to answer any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fanny. That was brilliant. Very well presented, beautifully clear. Thank you. Excellent. So now is the time for all your questions to start coming in. I've got a starting question here, so we'll begin with this one about whether we think there will be important differences between different areas. So what do you think about that, Fanny? Are there likely to be, or are you seeing important differences between different geographical areas?
So we haven't checked yet, unfortunately, because it's a bit more complex analysis in terms of comparing different places and need to account for a lot of variables. So I cannot say what's in there yet, but we are expecting a few things to rise, yes. And notably, we did select those 6 local authorities and we get in contact with them for a reason, which is that they have, the councils are making a lot of effort, and they're having a lot of initiatives going on to help with social cohesion. So we are expecting them and their population to cope better with the problem of social cohesion that our main big regions of Kent, for example, but also Scotland and Wales, would not benefit from this program. That's one thing we'd be very keen on checking out, and we would expect some difference going on there.
Great, thank you, Fanny. Another question is also, are you connecting with any other studies that are happening in other countries so that there's a comparison between the UK and maybe other areas across the world?
So we are in contact with other researchers within the UK, because there's obviously a lot of different initiatives going on, a lot of survey projects. So in the UK, yes. Internationally, a bit less, although we've been, yeah, I can stop sharing. That's
okay. I think you've stopped.
Okay. Yeah, that is fine. Yeah, and we are, what was I saying? Sorry, I just don't know. Yes, we are not in very close contact with other researchers abroad. Although from our own survey, we've been collecting a bit earlier, though, that was in March, April. We also had some data from Italy and France. And we've seen very similar response in terms of, or at least in terms of mechanisms. So for example, the level of trust in politicians, which I mentioned, was linked to people's behavior and actual compliance with restriction in the same way in Italy and France in the UK.
Did you see a similar sort of correlation between the level of trust in local politicians as compared to governments or central government?
In different countries?
Yeah, or did you not get a glimpse of that yet?
Oh God, I can't remember exactly. I don't want to say something wrong.
No, absolutely.
I think so. I think it was similar. So the level of trust is different between countries. It was really low when we did that in France. It was much higher in Italy, but the relationship from trust to behavior was similar. And I think at the local level as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Ben. So how do the findings on trust and social connections compare with any comparable baseline data available from before COVID-19? Very important question, what we have before that.
Yeah. So I think what we have follows quite closely other big surveys or representative surveys. And basically what we've seen and other people have seen is that when it started, you really had a huge increase of trust, which is something that political psychologists explain in a sort of strange, I mean, a relationship that people have to the government, that when you don't know what to do, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a threat. You look up at your government because they will know and they will tell you what to do. So at this first stage, we saw and I think in all countries, not just in the UK, we saw a really big increase in trust in the government. And then we start realizing that maybe the decisions they take were not the best. We start comparing across country. We got the numbers of new cases, new deaths coming in. And right now, this trust is decreasing, as I show briefly there. And it's not just our sample. It's something that we see at the international level and also in other surveys.
Thank you. So I've got a question here just about definition of young people. How do you define young people? What's the age range that you use?
Right. So here so basically I did not create different categories. I just use age as a continuous variable, if you want. So when I say younger people or older people, it has to be understood as a correlation. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to this or that, in a sense. So yeah, in that sense, it's not, I don't have like a specific range of age for young and old. It's really younger and older.
We've got a similar question to the one that we had before about what information we might have had before. Did we have any information about social connections before the COVID-19 pandemic that we can kind of connect the data to?
Yeah, we do actually, because we've so the 6 local authorities in England, that's the first time that we're collecting data there, so we don't know about them. But in Kent, Scotland and Wales, our research team has been collecting data for years now, because we've interrogated people right, for example, before the European election of May last year, and after this European election, and then again before the general election of December 2019, and then again after the general election. So we do have comparison points with all of those. And it's a sort of V-shape, really, or like a mountain shape, should I say, the other way around. So there were high, perception of divisions were quite high, notably, for example, the one I mentioned, UK and Europe, but also young and old people, or people living in different places of the country. That was quite high just before the general election, which makes sense, knowing what we were voting about and all the different things going on at that moment. It was also quite high in February, and then people start to be coming together a bit more in March and May. That's when we had data. So that was the sense of all in this together, trying to phase that together. And unfortunately, this is already going up again. So we are seeing the divisions arising again right now, even though the pandemic is not even done yet.
Thank you. I've got another question here, which is, do you think that the decline in trust with national politicians is causing increase in trust locally? Or do you think that these things are unconnected? Is there a sort of a link between the decline and the increase?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know about that. I would imagine it's different for different people. And it might depend also on how concerned you are yourself about politics and how involved you get into politics. I would imagine not concerned people to just put all politicians in the same basket and think the same thing about local and national politicians, or whatever the level they are at, whatever the hierarchy. Whereas maybe if you are more involved in politics, you know more about your local politicians, for example, that might be where you have this inverse relationship and you put your trust more in the local than in the national level. But that's just speculative from me at the moment. I don't have like any strong data to support that.
Thank you. So another thing that was striking was actually looking at the sort of distrust with London, and the feeling that London was becoming very separate to the rest of the country, and also the way that we might perceive central government and local government, which we've obviously just picked up on, but actually what we can extrapolate from that about the level of work that we might need to do in order to build trust again within the different groups that you've looked at, the different age groups, socioeconomic groups that you looked at. Any ideas on that? What can we do to start building that trust?
I'm not sure. I'm afraid that's a very complicated, complex issue. I mean, of course, this sort of big city versus the rest of the country thing, it's not new, and it's not even just in the UK. It's something you see everywhere. France is exactly the same, with all the country hating people from Paris, really. I think it's even stronger than London and the UK. So yeah, I'm afraid I don't have like a simple answer to that. It's going to be very, very complex, I'm afraid, to be able to rebuild those relations of trust.
The other one, we've got a question here from Chana regarding the time people have been involved in volunteering. Did you see a difference in how they perceived changes in local connections during lockdown?
That's very interesting. I haven't checked that yet, unfortunately, but that's definitely something we'll be going into. It's very interesting.
I have another question about, so we've got kind of 83%, 84% white in the surveys at the beginning, just a kind of a reason why so many people within those original surveys, that first wave, were from white communities.
Well, I think that actually maps on the demographic of the places where we were collecting data. We do hope that we'll be able in the future to go into more diverse city. I'm thinking Birmingham, Manchester, and places like that. And in there, we will be able to recruit more diverse sample and people from more diverse ethnicities, really. In terms of the places where we collected data, that's more or less what the population looks like.
Fantastic. And I've got a question here that's actually for us and for Joe, which is that given that there is a sort of a disconnection that perhaps is happening in communities, what is Belong planning to do in order to address this? So this is one for you, Joe, if you'd like to come back in. If you'd like to bring your video back in and answer that one. There she is, she's coming in.
Yeah, I thought that was a great question. I was actually going to say, sign up to our email list and then you can sort of see what we're doing with our regular newsletters. I think one of the things we're doing is finding out, and I think this research project that we're doing with the Centre for the Study of Group Processes is a great opportunity to really find out about what are the factors that hinder or help cohesion at a local level, and what can we do both in terms of practice and improving practice around cohesion and integration, but also looking at strategy and policy both at a local level but also at a national level. And the things we do as an organisation are really trying to take the research and evidence and translate it into helping those people on the ground who are trying to make change happen, improve their practice, and together with all of our members, influence policy. So I won't take up any more time, but do sign up to our newsletter, get in touch with us. It's very easy to get in touch with us via our website, and we'd be happy to tell you more.
There's also a direct link to a previous webinar that we had that was around audiences and how you might address audiences differently and work with audiences in a different way. And I think there's definitely something from these findings where we can use that and start sort of thinking about how we might be working very specifically with different audiences within one community and multiple communities.
Yeah. So I would just say, kind of have a look at our website. We've got a fantastic selection of resources uploaded there for, you know, how to do integration and cohesion better at a local level. We also run training courses and run events like this. So have a look and sign up to our newsletter and stay in touch.
Any more questions? Thank you very much, Jo. Any more questions? Please bring them in. I've got time for a couple more, but that's great. Thank you, Jo. So just something that you might think that we really should take away with us today, Fanny, something that's really struck you in this first wave of the research. Obviously, you're kind of in the middle of it, and there's a lot more that you're in the centre of it that you're not yet able to report on. I appreciate that. But yeah, is there sort of something that you would like us to take away?
It's a very good question. I guess the one thing I'm personally very interested about is those changing relationship between younger people and older people. I mean, I think the media has really played a role in that, because we had, of course, you know, a few rave party and corona parties and things like that, giving an image of young people as being extremely non-respectful of the rest and non-caring about the rest. But we also know that a number of them have been incredible and first respecting recommendation, but also investing a lot of their time. I know we had a focus group with young people, which were absolutely amazing, investing so much for their community. And of course, that's not the perception that the rest of the people seems to be having of them. And it's a bit the same with old people, you know. Of course, everybody seems to be caring about the elderly, trying to shield them, to protect them. We trust them a lot. And I mean, I don't want to be saying the opposite, but we, of course, know as well that some people have not been respecting that so much. We see growing divisions between generations as a result of that. And so I think, I mean, first, it's something we want to continue investigating, see how, first how it evolves, then how we can explain that, and finally how we can maybe try to change that. And so I guess a key home message would be to try maybe to look differently at young people, because a lot of them might be doing anything, and they will be very, very widely represented in the media, but just remember that's not all of them, and a lot of them actually doing incredible things.
So kind of sharing those stories, actually, it struck me as also one of the young people that I spoke to who has done a marvellous thing, connecting her grandmother to another elderly lady that she didn't know that lives around the corner, and sort of linking those two together. So some really fantastic stuff. And I think you're right. I think sharing some of those stories, what's happening locally, what young people are doing locally to connect to older people, so that we're changing that perception. We're starting to get people to see it beyond, because a lot of the figures that you're looking at are perceptions without people maybe looking and seeing exactly what's happening, because they don't have that information because they're in lockdown. Brilliant, thank you. I've got a question here. If you were to expand this research, what areas would you seek to work in?
Well, so we do have a lot more other things than what I just described here. So just to give you an overview of other things we are exploring, we are also going into the realm of stereotypes and discrimination and prejudice quite a bit. We are exploring different groups, ethnic minorities, but also all sorts of immigrants, from asylum seekers to economic migrants to other sorts of immigrants. so that's one thing we are very much interested about, also to see how that might be changing with time. With Brexit happening, maybe, you know, different relationship to foreigners, maybe foreigners having different perception of the native, or at least the UK citizens, for example. That's one thing. We are also, I didn't mention that at all, but we also have a range of personality traits that we measure in there. We are interested in beliefs in conspiracy theories, for example, but also in the sort of motivations that people have, in the sense of human motivation, what sort of goals you have for yourselves, basically what motivates you in life. It's a huge literature going into that. We're also interested in seeing how that might change how then you interact with other people. We're also looking into the very basic personality traits. So how much people are oriented towards others or toward themselves. They want to achieve things in lives. They are more or less, you know, feeling a range of emotions and so on. That's another thing. Still another thing is the separatism in the realm of political psychology. We've been following Dominic Abrams at the University of Kent has been doing that for years, following people in Scotland about the question of the referendum and being their own countries. We've seen a little bit of that in Wales, but not so much. But there's also movements in England wanting more control at the county level and less at the national level. So we are also looking at all sorts of factors that explain why people want to be more separate from the rest and might want to form the entire country. I'm going to stop there, but we still have like a lot of things going on. And that was really just like a tiny bit of all the things that we are.
I was going to say, it's just the beginning, isn't it? Well, one of the
Yes.
questions that's come up here is actually about, so there's a lack of trust in central government, but are you getting any indications about, you just mentioned Scotland, for example, trust in politicians like Nicola Sturgeon? Is it very different within England, the perception of perhaps politicians outside of England and in Scotland?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we are testing that. We are very interested in that, but not with the current respondents. But the people in Scotland, we've been asking them about both their perception of Boris Johnson or Theresa May when she was in post before, but also Nicola Sturgeon. We ask about Adam Price in Wales, other sort of politicians. I haven't checked exactly what was going on in the June data, and of course we are just collecting the July data now, so I can't tell you for sure, but we are interested in that, yes. And we also, for example, you know, Scotland and Wales also had their all rules. They didn't they start to lockdown at a different time, they stopped it at a different time, they didn't open school at the same time as England did. So we are also looking at that and whether they trust their local governments to take good decisions more than the UK government. So I can tell you that we will look into that, but I haven't yet, so I have no result to share with you yet. Sorry.
I've just got a thing here, which is it'd be good to mention that we'd be keen to find out more about some of the other large regions, so major metropolitan areas that we can see. Yes. Versus, so the sort of major cities versus regional areas.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Is that an aim, or is that within the current research remit?
It's not within that project, but yeah, I mean, I just mentioned briefly Birmingham and Manchester earlier, but yes, we that's also something we really aim at doing. We're hoping to get there. That would be also extremely interesting. I mean, somebody mentioned the question of ethnicity before. Those places are also very, very much different from Kent or from Scotland, for example. So they would be very, very good to be able to go there. Yeah.
So where can we find the research that you're doing on the other groups that you mentioned, like those that believe in conspiracy theories, for example?
So we will, I guess those findings will develop more in the next report. The next finding reports will be due in September. And all those reports will be put on the Belong website and also at Kent. So I guess the easier would be to, as Joe said, to just subscribe to Belong newsletter to follow what's going on there. Or also to follow us from the Uni of Kent, either on Twitter or the website. And yeah, we'll make sure to share all new findings as they become available.
Brilliant. Excellent. I think I'm going to close there. If there's anything I've missed, we shall send it out to everybody. But thank you so much, Fanny, for taking
Thank
part
you.
in this today and for sharing all of your research. And we're really excited to see what happens to the next wave, because I know that you're still in the middle of it all. You're now in this second stage, or well into the second stage. So it'll be great to see what happens next. But thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great. And I just want also to finish by thanking all our amazing partners, all the local authorities and charities and organizations. They've been amazing. We've had such a great sample. Thanks to them. So
brilliant. Thank you very much.